Minister, thank you very much for coming in. Before I start, and I hope I have enough time to say what I want to say, the most important people in all of this are the victims of the stabbings last Thursday night. I just want to preface anything I'm going to say now with that. Also, Minister, I'm not looking for anybody's resignation. I'm not looking for anybody's sacking. And I think what we need now is solidarity, and what we need is a bit of unity in this House. But in order to do that, I think we have to face the facts of life. Now, I was downstairs in Committee Room 4 where the Commissioner of An Garda Síochána was being questioned by the committee. And Senator Ruane asked a very important question. She said, what is the primary driver for the latent inchoate violence in our society? I'm a Dubliner. I went to school in the 1960s, believe it or not. And Dublin has changed. It has become a more violent place. And the reason for it, the primary driver, as asked by Senator Ruane of the Commissioner, is social inequality. We have a large number of citizens who feel unfairness and exclusion right across the spectrum: housing, education, health, social protection. And that is the primary driver, and that is something that we have to address. Policing, we're not going to police our way out of this, although policing is a very, very important component. And I want to say that I think there are many, many moving parts in what's happened in the last number of months. I'm going to try and go through it. So I'm a Dubliner. I remember the riots in 1981 during the hunger strikes, when the British Embassy was burnt down. What's the difference between now and then? I'll tell you the difference. The guards were not the primary target of the rioters. The guards were in the way. They wanted to get at the embassy. There was a political ideology, whatever you might call it. But my father was a guard. He was involved in those riots. And as a guard, he was able to live in the community that he policed. He could afford a house. And he was able to have the modest ambition of sending all 5 of us to university. That's something that needs to be addressed. If we want to attract and retain people in An Garda Síochána, in teaching, in nursing, across all of our public services, the fundamental building blocks of our society, we have to reverse the dynamic that we've seen over the last 20 years of austerity and neoliberal economic agenda. The last riots then, major ones, 2006, the Love Ulster Parade. What's different between now and then? The guards were not the target. We, as politicians, were not the target. Again, it was an angry, inchoate mob. And also the other difference was that digital media was really kind of in its infancy. So they didn't have the kind of capacity to collectively organise in the way they have now. 2023, the riot we had last Thursday is the culmination of a number of things. And really, what happened on Thursday, those tragic events, unlike the statements that have been made by some senators in this House, that stabbing was not predictable. I'm sorry to say these things happen. And as you said, Senator, it doesn't matter whether the perpetrator was English, Irish, Japanese, Italian, it doesn't matter. These things happen every now and again. But it was seized upon by people outside this House, and there are people inside this House, and we need to address this as the elephant in the room. We now have members of these Houses who are prepared to engage in dog whistle politics to provoke hatred. And I think after this motion, we need to have a discussion as a House about what we think is acceptable in terms of our political discourse and our narratives. So who are we looking at? Who's responsible for these riots at the moment? The social inequality is being mobilised by far-right groups. We have 12 far-right groups that are active in Ireland at the moment, and they are exploiting the unfairness and exclusion that is experienced by so many people. In 2022, the NUI Maynooth published a major piece of research, Resisting the Far Right, and if I could quote from it, a recurring theme among the far right, dating back to the Nazis in 1930s Germany, is to create a perception of crisis with an immediately and easily identifiable enemy of the people. For the Nazis, the enemies were Jews, homosexuals and gypsies, using the language of their time. Today, for Irish fascists and the far right, the enemies of the people now are immigrants, travellers, asylum seekers, the LGBTQ community and Roma communities. In their Telegram groups, Facebook pages, X accounts and elsewhere, they spread conspiracy theories and attempt to engender a moral panic about the groups they have targeted as enemies. And I am sorry to say there are people in this House who seek to amplify that moral panic and that false sense of crisis. I'm running out of time, but the NUI Minute study is so good, and it identifies solutions to this. We must fund and empower community-based civic groups and NGOs to educate and inform and counter the toxic narratives of the far right. But most importantly and fundamentally, there is a requirement to immediately address the stressors exploited by the far right, the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, and crises in health and social well-being. We fixed our economy, now we have to fix our society, and we need to do that together and in solidarity. And finally, I have given a great deal of thought to what's happening now, Minister. I listened very carefully to the speeches that were made outside here in October during the protests. And again, the speakers said, we are the enemy. They want to bring this edifice down. They're targeting us as politicians. And with these far-right groups, there's also an extreme form of misogyny. They will target female TDs, senators and councillors. And I'm sorry to say, but I think it's only a matter of time before a member of this House, but particularly a female member of this House, will be attacked.
Thank you, Senator.
And finally, I'm going to say that Garda Síochána have also been targeted. And they are called by these far-right groups our henchmen, that we are traitors to whatever warped idea they have of a republic. So we really need to ensure that Garda Síochána are properly equipped, properly supported, so that they can police this city. We don't need paramilitary-style policing in Dublin. We need to continue our great tradition of policing by consent. And Garda Síochána still occupy a wonderful place in our society, but they need our support, and I think it is inevitable. One of the features of the riots last week was the deliberate targeting of members of Garda Síochána, members of our public transport services, members of the fire service and paramedics. That's a step change, and they need our support. But I think we all need to get together. But fundamentally, the social contract has to be repaired.
Thank you, Senator.